Do gods die, according to Sumerian texts? Yes, and their death wars were so terrible that the world almost perished. When Enlil tried to kill his own brother, Marduk rebelled against his father. Inanna descended to the underworld and couldn't return. So what was the real reason behind these god wars? Tonight, we'll discover the truth behind the god wars, which are history's greatest mystery. These stories aren't just mythology. Modern archaeology has proven that these god wars reflected real historical events. The destruction of cities, the collapse of civilizations, the migration of peoples, all were recorded as these divine wars. This isn't just an ancient tale. This is the story of the bloody struggle of power, authority, and civilization. In modern religions, gods are immortal and unchanging. But in Sumer, the situation was completely different. Sumerian gods, just like humans, were born, grew up, fought, and died. How was this possible? The answer lay at the foundation of Sumerian cosmology. In Sumer, the universe was a constantly changing and evolving system. Even the most powerful god could be overthrown by others. This wasn't just a theoretical concept. Sumerian tablets contain stories where gods actually killed each other. One of the oldest texts, the epic Enlil and Ninlil, tells how Enlil kidnapped the young goddess Ninlil. For this crime, the other gods decided to punish Enlil with death. But what was truly surprising was the discovery that these stories weren't just mythology. Everything began with the power struggle between An, god of the heavens, and Enlil, god of the air. An was the oldest and theoretically most powerful god of the Sumerian pantheon, but he had aged and become passive. He no longer concerned himself with worldly affairs. Enlil, however, was young, powerful, and ambitious. He wasn't just the god of air, but also the lord of storms and wars. And he was tired of his father An's passivity. The Sumerian myth, the overthrow of An, tells of this conflict. Enlil challenges his father. You can no longer just sit in the heavens and wait. The world is changing. Humans are multiplying. A strong leader is needed. And doesn't accept his son's challenge. The war between the two gods begins. This war wasn't just a mythological story. Archaeological findings show that around 3200 BCE, a great political change occurred in the city of Uruk. The power of An's temple was declining, while the cult of Enlil was growing stronger. The god war was actually the mythological narrative of political revolution. After Enlil's overthrow of An, a new conflict began. This time the enemy was his own brother, Enki. Enki was the god of water and wisdom. Unlike Enlil, he was peaceful and creative. He was friendly to humans, giving them knowledge and technology. The philosophical difference between the two brothers gradually turned into deadly enmity. Enlil thought humans had become too powerful, intelligent enough to pose a threat to the gods. According to him, humans should only serve the gods and shouldn't become too knowledgeable. Enki argued the complete opposite. According to him, since humans were the creation of the gods, they should protect and develop them. This conflict is the real reason behind the famous flood story. Enlil decided to destroy humanity. He would send a great flood to drown all humans, but Enki secretly warned a human named Utnapishtim and told him to build a ship. The war between two brother gods had become intertwined with humanity's fate. The Sumerian flood story was much more complex and bloody than the biblical Noah's flood. This wasn't just a natural disaster, but the final phase of the war between two gods. Enlil sent the Great Flood not only to destroy humanity, but also to punish his brother Enki, because Enki was constantly helping humans, protecting them. The flood story told by Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh narrates the most dramatic part of this god war. Enlil's rage was cracking the heavens. Storms, lightning, floods. The world was groaning with the god's wrath, but Enki was secretly helping me. He was protecting me against his brother's rage. The flood affected not only humans, but the gods themselves. Sumerian tablets record that some gods died during the flood. Most surprisingly, it was discovered that these stories might reflect an actual flood. Archaeological findings show that around 2900 BCE, a great flood disaster occurred in Mesopotamia. The god war was the mythological interpretation of a real natural disaster. While the wars between Enlil and Enki continued, a new generation of gods was emerging. Their leader was Marduk, the god of Babylon. Marduk was a young, powerful, and ambitious god. He wasn't satisfied with the management style of the old gods. According to him, the gods were too passive and fought too much among themselves. In the epic Enuma Elish, Marduk's rebellion against the old gods is told. Marduk first challenged his own father, Ea, the Babylonian version of Enki. The elders should now leave governance to the young generation. Then he fought his greatest enemy, Tiamat. Tiamat was the primordial chaos goddess. She was the symbol of the old order. The war between Marduk and Tiamat is the most epic battle in Sumerian mythology. Marduk attacked Tiamat by gathering the winds. The goddess responded in terrifying dragon form. When the two powers clashed, the heavens cracked, the seas began to boil. At the end of this war, Marduk kills Tiamat and creates the new world from her corpse. But the real meaning of this story was a political revolution. Around 1800 BCE, the city of Babylon was becoming the hegemonic power of Mesopotamia. The old Sumerian gods were falling from grace, and Marduk was becoming the god of the new era. The god war was again a reflection of real political change. While the male gods were fighting, the female goddesses were also waging their own power struggles. The most dramatic example of this struggle was Inanna's descent to the underworld. Inanna was the goddess of love and war. She wasn't just beautiful, but also very powerful and ambitious, and she had her eyes on the underworld, ruled by her sister, Erechkigal. Erechkigal was the queen of death. She was the absolute ruler of the underworld. No god could enter the realm of the dead without her permission. But Inanna decided to break this rule. In the epic Inanna's Descent to the Underworld, the deadly conflict between two sisters is told. Inanna, armed with all her power, descended to the underworld. Passing through 7 gates, she lost one source of power at each gate. At the final gate, she remained completely naked and powerless. Ereshkigal killed her as soon as she saw her. This death wasn't just jealousy between two sisters. This was actually the cosmic war between the forces of life and death. Inanna's death caused great chaos in the world. Nature died. Love disappeared. Fertility stopped. If the other gods had to take action to save Inanna. This story might be the mythological explanation of seasonal changes, but at the same time, it also reflected the political struggle of female power. Inanna's return from the underworld started a new tragedy, because according to the law of the underworld, someone else had to stay in place of everyone who left there. Inanna chose her husband Dumuzi as the sacrifice. Dumuzi was the shepherd god. He was the symbol of pastoral life, nature, and fertility. He was also Inanna's lover, but when Inanna returned from death, she didn't find Dumuzi mourning. He was sitting on his throne as if nothing had happened. Inanna's rage was terrible. While I was fighting death, You were having fun here. Then you taste death. Dumuzi's death is one of the most bitter stories in Sumerian mythology, because this wasn't just the death of a god, but also the death of nature. In the epic The Death of Dumuzi, how nature mourned for Dumuzi is told. When Dumuzi died, flowers withered, trees shed their leaves, animals stopped reproducing, the world turned into a giant cemetery. This story shows how ancient people perceived the winter season, but at the same time, it was also a metaphor for how political leaders were sacrificed. In reality, the Dumuzi cult was collapsing at certain periods, and its leaders were being killed. The god's death was a reflection of real political murders. During Enlil's long reign, his own son Ninurta also began to rebel against his father. Ninurta was the god of war and hunting. He was young, powerful, and couldn't tolerate his father's passive management. In the epic Ninurta's Adventure, the son's rebellion against his father is told. Ninurta said to Enlil, "Father, you have grown too old. Now is the time for young powers. There is chaos in the world. Monsters are breeding, but you just sit in your palace." Enlil didn't accept his son's challenge. A violent conflict began between the two gods. This war wasn't just a father-son quarrel. This was the struggle between old and new management philosophies. Ninurta advocated active interventionist policy. According to him, gods should interfere in worldly affairs, kill monsters, and control chaos. Enlil, on the other hand, advocated that gods should stay away from humans and intervene only when necessary. This philosophical conflict turned into physical war, and the consequences affected all of Mesopotamia, because this god war was actually the mythological reflection of wars between different city-states. In Sumerian mythology, gods didn't just fight each other, they also had to struggle with terrible monsters. These monsters were the remnants of chaos and the old order. The most famous were dragons, children of Tiamat, Humbaba the forest monster, and Kur the underworld dragon. In the epic Ninurta and Asaku, one of the most terrible monster wars is told. Asaku was so powerful that his breath melted mountains, his eyes blazed fire, poisonous vapor came from his mouth. When Ninurta fought him, the heavens trembled, the earth split. These monster wars weren't just fantastic stories. Modern archaeology discovered that these stories reflected real historical events. Monsters actually represented barbarian tribes that threatened civilization. For example, Humbaba the forest monster symbolized nomadic raiders from the Zagros Mountains. The gods' monster wars were actually the mythological narrative of the struggle of Sumerian city-states against barbarian attacks. Most interestingly, the gods didn't always win in these wars. Some monsters were so powerful that they could even defeat gods. This situation reflected that in real life, Sumerian cities sometimes suffered defeats against barbarian attacks. One of the most interesting examples of god wars was the conflict between goddess Inanna and hero king Gilgamesh. Inanna was the protective goddess of the city of Uruk. Gilgamesh was the king of the same city. Theoretically, they should have been allies, but Gilgamesh didn't recognize Inanna's authority. He wasn't just human, but also semi-divine, and this made him arrogant. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, it's told that Inanna proposed love to Gilgamesh, but was rejected. Inanna said to Gilgamesh, "Be my husband, I will give you all my power." But Gilgamesh sarcastically replied, "How many husbands have you killed? I won't be your victim." Inanna's rage was terrible. She sent the bull of heaven upon Uruk for revenge. The bull of heaven was so powerful that it killed hundreds of people with its breath. But Gilgamesh and his friend Enkidu managed to kill this monster. This event was a major turning point in God-human relations, because this was the first victory of a human against a god. In real life, this story might reflect a political revolution in the city of Uruk. Perhaps the power of the priestly class was declining while royal authority was strengthening. The God War was again a symbol of political change. God wars were also happening in the underworld. The most dramatic example was the conflict between Nergal, god of war, and Ereshkigal, queen of death. Nergal was the god of plagues and death, but he didn't want to live in the underworld. He preferred to fight and conquer on the earth's surface. Ereshkigal, on the other hand, was the absolute ruler of the underworld. According to her, every death god should stay in the underworld and serve the realm of the dead. In the epic Nergal and Ereshkigal, the power struggle between these two gods is told. When Nergal descended to the underworld, he decided to kill Ereshkigal, but the goddess was so powerful that even Nergal couldn't defeat her. Finally, a deadly war began between them. This war was disrupting the cosmic balance between life and death. Chaos forces emerging from the underworld were threatening the world. The other gods had to intervene to stop this war, because if the death gods destroyed each other, the death system would collapse. The story reflected ancient people's fears about death and disease, but at the same time, it also showed the competition between different death cults. In Mesopotamia, different cities had different death gods. The wars of these gods were actually conflicts between different funeral traditions. One of the most interesting god wars concerned wisdom and creativity. The competition between Enki, god of water, and Ninursag, mother goddess, was about the creation of humanity. Both saw themselves as creators of humans, and this claim turned into deadly competition. In the epic Enki and Ninursag, the creativity contest between these two gods is told. Enki said, "I created humans from water and mud." Ninursag replied, "No, I created them with the fertility of earth." Both wanted to prove that their creations were superior. This contest turned into a strange creature creation competition. Each god was creating different beings to show their own power. Enki, using the water element, created fish-human hybrids. Ninursag, with earth power, produced giant humans. But most of these creatures turned out flawed and dangerous. Some were too strong, some too weak, and some uncontrollable. This creature war finally stopped with the intervention of other gods, because these creatures were disrupting the natural balance. In reality, this story might reflect the competition between different production technologies. The competition between Enki's water technology, irrigation, and Ninursag's agricultural technology. A recurring theme in Sumerian mythology was young gods overthrowing old gods. This wasn't just individual conflicts, but systematic generational warfare. The clearest example was Marduk's effort to overthrow not just Tiamat, but the entire old generation of gods. In the continuation of Enuma Elish, the coalition Marduk formed with other young gods is told. Marduk called to the young gods, "The old ones have become too weak. Now let us rule the world. They belong to the past, the future is ours." This generation war wasn't just about age. This was a conflict between different management philosophies. The old gods, Enlil, Enki, advocated stability and gradual management. According to them, change should be slow and careful. The young gods, Marduk, Ninurta, Inanna, preferred rapid change and active intervention. According to them, the world was constantly changing, and gods should adapt This philosophical difference turned into physical war, and the consequences changed the entire religious system of Mesopotamia. After 2000 BCE, the old Sumerian gods fell from grace. New Babylonian and Assyrian gods came to the fore. The god wars were actually the mythological narrative of religious reforms. The most forgotten wars in Sumerian mythology were the struggles of female goddesses against male god dominance. Initially, female goddesses were very powerful in the Sumerian pantheon. Figures like Inanna, Ninursag, and Ereshkigal were equal in power to male gods. But over time, male gods tried to limit the power of female goddesses. In the epic Inanna and Enki, an early example of this gender power struggle is told. Inanna decided to steal Enki's wisdom treasures because Enki wanted these powers to remain only with male gods. But Inanna thought female goddesses should also have equal rights. Inanna, with a cunning plan, got Enki drunk and stole his me, called divine powers. Among these powers were kingship, warriorship, and leadership. When Enki sobered up, he tried to stop Inanna. A violent chase began between the two gods. This story was very important in terms of the historical development of women's rights, because Inanna won and brought these powers to the city of Uruk. In reality, this legend might reflect the increase in the power of female priests in the city of Uruk. Political power was being distributed not only to male kings, but also to female goddesses. But this feminist revolution didn't last long. In the following centuries, male gods re-established supremacy. After 2000 BCE, god wars took on a more political character. They were no longer just individual conflicts, but reflections of wars between city-states. The biggest war was between Marduk, god of Babylon, and Assur, god of Assyria. Marduk had grown stronger with the rise of the Babylonian Empire. He declared himself the chief god of all Mesopotamia. Assur, on the other hand, was the national god of the Assyrian Empire. He also had the same claim. In the epic Marduk-Assur Wars, the cosmic conflict between two gods is told. Marduk stood in the south, Assur in the north. Since both considered the same lands as theirs, a terrible war began between them. This war continued not only in the heavens, but also on earth. This war was actually the mythological narrative of the 1,000-year conflict between the Babylonian and Assyrian empires. Whichever empire was strong, that empire's god also won in the god war. Political power and mythological power were parallel. Most interestingly, the old Sumerian gods also took sides in these wars. Enlil sometimes supported Marduk, sometimes Assur. This situation reflected the political division in Sumerian cities. In Sumerian eschatology, there was a belief that god wars would end with one last great conflict. In the epic The Final War, it's told that all gods would divide into two camps and engage in the ultimate battle. The time will come when all gods will be divided into two armies, light gods against dark gods. This war will determine the fate of the universe. This apocalyptic vision deeply influenced the eschatological understanding of later religions, Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Christianity. In the Sumerian version, the winner of this final war wasn't predetermined. Chaos forces were as powerful as order forces. The most frightening detail was the possibility that all gods might die in this war. If this happened, the universe would also perish. This terrifying scenario might reflect the pessimism of Sumer's collapse period. After 1750 BCE, Sumer lost its independence. This trauma might have created apocalyptic themes in their mythology. Modern archaeology has proven that Sumerian god wars reflected real historical events. Every god war story was the mythological narrative of a specific historical event. In the Lenmore =, political revolution in Uruk, 3200 BCE, in Enki conflict =, north-south city competition, 3000 BCE, flood wars =, Great Flood disaster, 2900 BCE, Marduk rebellion =, rise of Babylon, 1800 BCE, Inanna's death =, collapse of priestess class, in Uruk 2500 BCE. Archaeological findings show striking parallels between these stories and real events. For example, geographical details told in flood tablets match real flood traces. City names mentioned in god war tablets are the same as places that actually experienced wars. Most strikingly, some tablets mention real king names as gods. This discovery shows that god wars weren't just tales, but historical documents. Sumerian god wars didn't just affect political events, but also deeply influenced human psychology. These stories gave people the message that violence and conflict were normal. If even gods fought, it was natural for humans to fight. The concept of divine violence legitimized war in Mesopotamian society. Kings always referenced god wars when declaring war. Just as Marduk defeated Tiamat, I will defeat my enemies. This mythological legitimacy made war not just political, but also a religious duty. But at the same time, these stories also caused trauma and PTSD-like effects. People who constantly heard god war stories lived in constant anxiety because gods were unpredictable and dangerous. This situation led to the development of fatalism and fatalist thinking in Sumerian society. People began to believe they couldn't control their destinies. Sumerian god wars have also deeply influenced modern popular culture. Marvel's Thor films, DC's Wonder Woman, God of War game series, all were inspired by Sumerian god wars. Especially the concept of gods being mortal forms the foundation of modern superhero stories. In Marvel, gods can be wounded and die. This situation comes directly from Sumerian mythology. The theme of god wars has also become a favorite topic of blockbuster films. The Infinity War in Avengers films is the modern version of apocalyptic god wars in Sumer. Even in video games, this influence is seen. Kratos killing gods in God of War is directly inspired by Sumerian legends. This influence shows that Sumerian mythology has universal appeal because themes of power struggle, betrayal, and revenge are timeless. Sumerian god wars deeply influenced the development of later religions. Judaism, the monotheistic concept, might partly be a reaction against Sumerian god wars. If there's one god, there are no god wars. Christianity, the Satan figure, might have been inspired by chaos gods in Sumer, good versus evil god conflict. Islam, jinn and devil stories resemble enemy god stories in Sumer. Zoroastrianism, light versus darkness gods war, direct Sumerian influence. The most striking influence is seen in the fallen angel concept. In Sumer, gods could lose status and fall from their powers. This concept formed the foundation of the Satan figure in later religions. The story of Lucifer's fall is the Christian version of Sumerian god wars. This influence shows how deep Sumerian mythology was behind the spectacular wars of male gods. There were more insidious but effective wars of female goddesses. The power struggle between Ninerzag, Inanna, and Urishkagul was based more on political intrigue and manipulation than open conflict. In the tablet's Secret War of Goddesses, The traps these female gods set against each other are told. Ninhursag sent fake love magic to Inanna to break her power. Under the influence of this magic, Inanna fell in love with the wrong person and fell from power. These types of soft power wars might reflect the methods used by female political figures in Sumerian society. Since women couldn't use direct military force, they developed intelligence and manipulation strategies. These female goddess wars might seem like the ancient version of modern mean girls culture, but actually these were serious political struggles. Because each of these goddesses represented real city-states, Sumerian tablets describe in detail the fantastic weapons used in god wars. Enlil's weapons, storm arrows, create lightning. Flood staff starts deluge. Windshield repels enemy attacks. Marduk's weapons, net captures enemies. Four winds attacks from all directions. Red dragon war monster he rides. Inanna's weapons, love arrows drives enemies mad. War axe for physical combat. Me powers, divine authority. These weapons weren't just fantastic. These were mythological versions of real war technologies. For example, storm arrows might represent composite bow technology in reality. The net weapon might have been inspired by gladiator nets used in real battles. Most interestingly, these weapons were upgradable. Gods improved their weapons as they learned new technologies. This situation reflected the development of real military technology. In Sumerian mythology, god wars caused physical changes not only in the heavens but also on earth. In the Enki War, as a result of the conflict between two gods, new rivers formed, mountains were reshaped, sea levels changed. In the Marduk-Tiamat War, new continents were created from Tiamat's corpse, seas formed from her blood, mountain ranges were made from her bones. These geographical creation stories show how ancient people explained natural disasters. Earthquakes equal sign gods fighting underground. Volcanoes equal sign fire gods anger. Tsunamis equal sign sea gods war. Drought equals sign water gods defeat. Modern geology shows that these god war stories reflected real geographical events. Great geographical changes occurred in Mesopotamia between 3000 and 2000 BCE. Riverbeds changed, new delta areas formed. God wars were the mythological explanation of these changes. Sumerian god wars also had economic reasons. Gods fought not just for power, but also for economic resources. In the Enki and Enlil water wars, the real issue was water control. Enki wanted to keep all waters under his control, but Enlil said agricultural areas also needed water. The two gods fought over water rights. This story actually reflected conflicts over irrigation rights. In Mesopotamia, water was the most valuable resource. Whichever city controlled water sources became powerful. God wars were actually the mythological narrative of real wars fought for control of economic resources like water rights, trade routes, and agricultural lands. Most interestingly, gods also experienced economic crises. Enlil's treasury was exhausted because he had fought too many wars. He could no longer pay his army. This detail reflected the economic problems of real kingdoms. From a modern psychology perspective, Sumerian god wars show very interesting patterns. Oedipal complex, Ninurta's rebellion against his father Enlil sibling rivalry, Enlil Enki brother conflict gender competition, Inanna versus male gods, generational conflict, old versus young gods. These patterns reflect universal human psychology. According to Carl Jung, these myths are examples of collective unconscious. All humanity experiences these types of conflicts. According to Freud, God wars are sublimation of primitive fantasies. People project their own violent impulses onto gods. From modern trauma psychology perspective, these stories resemble PTSD symptoms, constant war hallucinations, paranoid thinking patterns, hypervigilance, trust issues. Sumerian society was experiencing collective trauma because it was constantly at war. God wars might be the mythological expression of this trauma. In Sumerian art, god wars were represented with very dramatic visuals in cylinder seals. God war scenes were the most popular theme in Enlil's dragon battle, Marduk killing Tiamat, Inanna's war dance. These visuals weren't just decorative, these were political propaganda tools. Whichever god was powerful, that god's war scenes were shown more magnificently. In reliefs, god wars were shown with kinetic energy, dynamic poses, dramatic facial expressions, motion lines, impact effects. These artistic techniques were precursors to modern comic book art. Sumerian artists were very successful at creating action sequences. Even in music, god wars were used as themes. In war hymns, the conflicts of gods were told with dramatic music. This multimedia approach resembles modern film music. In the Sumerian legal system, god wars were used as legal precedent. In court records, judges made decisions by referencing god wars. Enlil was right against Enki because Enki was the first to attack. Similarly, the plaintiff is right because the defendant was the first to attack. This divine jurisprudence system had very sophisticated rules. Self-defense rule, gods had the right to defend themselves. Proportionality rule, punishments should be proportional to crimes. Divine justice, final decision belonged to the most powerful god. Even in Hammurabi's code, there were references to god wars. The eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth rule came from the equal retaliation principle in god wars. The situation shows how mythology influenced the legal system. Legal concepts were derived from mythological stories. Modern science shows that some Sumerian god wars represented real natural events. Astronomical events, God's war in the sky, equals sign solar eclipse. Raining fire arrows, equals sign meteor shower. Thunder war, equals sign thunderstorms. Geological events, underground gods war, equals sign earthquakes. Mountains clashing, equals sign tectonic movements. Earth goddesses anger, equals sign volcanic eruptions. Climatological events, water gods war, equals sign floods. Wind gods conflict, equals sign storms. Fire gods wrath, equals sign droughts. The most striking example is the parallel between the Tiamat-Marduk war and cosmic collision theory. Modern astronomy suggests that large planets might have collided during the formation of the solar system. The Sumerian myth might be the cultural memory of this ancient cosmic event. This situation shows the connection between ancient wisdom and modern science. Sumerian god wars aren't just stories of the past. These might also be blueprints for future human conflicts. In the artificial intelligence age, conflicts between AI gods might occur. Competition between different AI systems, wars for digital resources, power struggles in virtual reality. In the space exploration age, divine conflicts between different planet colonies might happen. Mars versus Earth tensions, resource competition, technological supremacy wars. In the genetic engineering age, ethical conflicts between creator gods, enhancement versus natural humanity, designer babies competition, evolution direction, disagreements. These scenarios might be modern versions of Sumerian god wars, because human nature remains fundamentally the same. Power struggles, sibling rivalries, generational conflicts. These are timeless themes. Technology changes, but human psychology remains consistent. What do Sumerian god wars teach us after 5,000 years? First lesson: power creates corruption. Even the best intentioned leaders can become corrupt with absolute power. Second lesson: conflict is inevitable. Humans and gods will always compete for power. Third lesson: cooperation is necessary. Even the most powerful gods cannot win without alliances. Fourth lesson: change is unstoppable. Old generations are replaced by new ones. Fifth lesson: balance is crucial. Extreme power destabilizes the system. These lessons are also valid in modern politics, corporate power struggles, international conflicts, political party competitions, generational changes. Sumerian god wars are the timeless guide to human nature. They show us that the balance between conflict and cooperation is the key to civilization. And most importantly, no matter how powerful we become, no one is immortal. Every empire, every leader, every system eventually changes. This lesson is both humble and hopeful, because bad systems eventually fall, but good ideas survive. The story that began with Enlil's wrath wasn't just an ancient tale. This was the eternal story of power, ambition, and human nature. The Sumerian gods died. Their cities were destroyed. Their tablets were broken, but their wars never ended, because these wars are repeated in every generation. Every powerful leader sees himself as a god. Every sibling rivalry resembles the Enlil-Enki conflict. Every generational conflict repeats the overthrow of old gods by the young. God wars continue in the modern world too. Tech billionaires' rivalries, superpowers competitions, influence wars on social media. The greatest lesson we learned from Sumer is this: these wars are normal, but controllable. The ancient Sumerians tried to manage real conflicts by telling god wars as stories. We too can approach our modern god wars, power struggles in politics, economics, technology, with the same wisdom. Because these god wars that happened 5,000 years ago are actually mirrors of the human condition. And these mirrors give us both warning and hope. Warning: power corrupts. Conflicts are inevitable. Hope: wisdom survives. Cooperation is possible. Enlil's wrath has passed, but its lessons are eternal. The gods fought, died, and were forgotten, but their stories continue to live. Because these stories are our stories. Every generation fights the same wars, learns the same lessons, and perhaps one day will succeed in breaking this cycle. This is how the story ends, but real god wars continue around us every day. Learning to see them is both fascinating and instructive, because understanding the past is the first step to shaping the future.